The great writer and journalist Rod Liddell once said we should all be allowed to travel on the road to Damascus once at least. Problem is, Sir Keir seems to live on the Holiday Inn on the road to Damascus. Sir Keir Starmer's U-turns so often, so many important matters, that tonight I want to mediate a debate. Sir Keir Starmer versus Sir Keir Starmer. First, on the matter of a second referendum. Prime Minister, what do you think?
It's right that Parliament has the first say. It's right that Parliament has the first say. But if we need to break the impasse, our options must include campaigning for a public vote, and nobody is ruling out Remain as an option.
And will the doppelganger Sir Keir tell us what he thinks about a second referendum?
There's no case for going back into the EU, and that includes the single market and the customs union.
Well, there's quite a strong disagreement there, but what about the question of mass migration? Prime Minister.
So we have to make the case for the benefits of migration, the benefits of free movement. I want people in this country to be able to go and work abroad.
And what does the Reverend Starmer now think of mass migration?
We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together.
Well, there seems to be a certain degree of disagreement on the matter of migration, but could we find something on which the two agree? How about the winter fuel allowance?
The Prime Minister wants to do what we have to do in relation to the winter fuel allowance, but we have to take the tough decision to stabilise our economy.
And Sir Keir, what do you think?
We want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments.
Well, there doesn't seem to be much agreement there either. With the final question, to the two Sir Keirs, the Keir and the doppelganger Keir, is about having a grooming gangs national inquiry. Can we have some agreement on that, please?
Calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right.
Right-wing bandwagon. Is that what you think now, Sir Keir?
On the basis of what she's found, she says there should be a national inquiry. I've looked at her report. I've considered that material. I think she's right, and that's why there'll be a national inquiry.
Well, a wind-vane, changeable huff-puff, always a Prime Minister. That was tonight's final question, and the results are in. Today's loser of the State of the Nation Prime Minister's debate is the Reverend Keir Starmer. And while the succession of U-turns illustrated by this debate makes for amusing watching, there is something deeply serious underlying the political knockabout. The job of Prime Minister is to have good judgment. Decisions have to be made rapidly on imperfect, incomplete information. The Prime Minister must decide. That is his job. But Starmer keeps on making the wrong choices, which undermines confidence in his administration and confidence in the country abroad. In this case, the government refused a national inquiry for months. As we just heard from the Prime Minister, he suggested those calling for one were simply jumping on a far-right bandwagon. But in reality, it was Labour supporters, the left, who were apprehensive about having a national inquiry because the truth about grooming gangs is one that shatters the liberal mythology of multiculturalism. For years we've been told, if we keep quiet, submit to mass migration and tolerate anything that or anyone who crosses our borders, the United Kingdom will become a haven of racial and cultural integration. But grooming gangs, rape gangs, this stain on the country's modern history proves that we were misled. And this undermines what they seek to protect. This country has done well, certainly compared to America or France, in incorporating new arrivals. But it's not perfect, and the cover-up over Pakistani, primarily, but Asian rape gangs has made people distrustful and made the propaganda around multiculturalism appear dishonest. The inquiry must now tell the truth, and perhaps most importantly, prosecutions need to follow. As always, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by the Conservative MP for the Weald of Kent, Katie Lam. Katie, thank you very much for joining me from College Green, just outside the Palace of Westminster. I assume you were in the House for the Home Secretary's statement. What do you think of what she had to say about this?
It was remarkable, really, and in lots of ways good. We welcome, and I welcome, and victims and survivors very much welcome the news that she had to bring us. But it was amazing to hear her say it just a few weeks and months after the government had been saying the opposite.
Well, it is extraordinary, isn't it? Because when people were calling for an investigation in January, they were far right, and now it's government policy. I mean, this seems to be a little inconsistent, to say the least.
To say the very least, and there are specific members of Parliament, Sean Davies today, who's now the Member of Parliament for Telford, who previously wrote a letter to previous Conservative government ministers saying to them, there's nothing to see here, please don't hold an inquiry in Telford. Today saying that effectively he'd been calling for this all along. Now, we welcome the government's change of heart, but that's not true.
And it's really important that we think about the victims of this who have been so badly treated. And this comes out in the Casey report that they were called child prostitutes. Some of them have been prosecuted for offences. Doesn't it need to be at the forefront of any report how things can be put right for those who suffered from the rape gangs?
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important that the government is honest about what they have been saying, and why I think that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary should explain why they've changed their minds. These victims and survivors have, for years and in some cases decades, heard people rubbish what they had to say, make it seem like they were liars, like exactly as you say, that some of these victims were child prostitutes, that they were doing things that they wanted to do. And after all of this time of being disbelieved, if people have changed their minds, that is wonderful. But to do so credibly, they need to explain why, and they need to give us the details of this inquiry. Who's going to lead it? Where exactly will it cover? They say it's going to be national, but the report itself looks like it might actually be a coordination of local inquiries. We need to see this information for what the government is saying to be credible.
And what do you think it says about the culture of the nation that there was such a desire to cover this up in so many different towns across the country?
Unfortunately, I think, and sadly, I think it says something quite dark about where we've ended up in Britain on a few different issues, that so many people were more comfortable aiding and abetting, facilitating and covering up mass child rape than they were of being accused of being racist. And we know that that's the case. That is well documented. There are documents, there are emails that people wrote at the time. West Midlands Police, back in 2010, suppressed a report saying that there were Asian Pakistani men who were grooming girls outside care homes, outside the gates of playgrounds and schools. And we know from what people said at the time that that report was suppressed because people were worried about inflaming community tensions. And they were more worried about that than they were about our children.
And did that go all the way through? Because we were in government at the time, not necessarily either of us personally, but the Conservatives from 2010 to 2024. Were we part of this concern of not wanting to inflame racial tension, or did we simply not know? Was it ignorance, or was it being part of an unsatisfactory culture?
As you say, I wasn't a member of Parliament then, so the truthful answer is I don't know. But if I were to guess, I would say it's probably a little bit of both. It's human nature not to look straight at things that you find difficult or uncomfortable. But there were definitely brave people in the last government. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, started the Grooming Gangs Task Force. She spoke out about this issue quite a lot and was, at the time, rubbished and ridiculed. So it's amazing to see how far we've come.
Well, Katie Lam, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm sorry you're not in the studio, but we're in the wrong studio today for technical reasons. I'm joined now by my very pugnacious panel, the former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, and the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie. Lloyd, the problem is Starmer keeps on U-turning, and he does so in a most inelegant way that it was very silly of him to say worrying about rape gangs was a far-right matter, wasn't it, in January, and now having to U-turn as more has come out?
Well, if you listen to that whole speech again, even in that same speech, he already had opened the door by saying he doesn't rule out a national inquiry immediately, but he wanted to go and implement the J recommendations and then do a short-fire review. So already there was an ambiguity. And if you're going to be opening with ambiguity, it's probably best not to criticise the other side in such a particular way. I understand what he was trying to say is that people who were whipping this up as a Labour versus Conservative thing rather than a we have all been a bit complicit and taken our eye off the ball, and there are a few. Sarah Champion is a good example on the Labour side, who has constantly and repeatedly raised this issue. She comes from an area, represents an area where this was a problem, and she has not been shy about it. But the majority of people were shy about it, and in government they were shy about it on both sides, and it would have been better, I think, in hindsight, if he had said that. But this is the thing that you're looking for a Prime Minister, isn't it? Someone who isn't looking back always in hindsight, but makes the right judgments. So I do think it's probably a bit of a mistake, but we are now in a situation where I think we are probably stronger than if we had rushed into a national inquiry, because you have got the implementation of a number of the J recommendations that have now been able to be added to bills, including the duty of candour, which requires people, even if there's not a national inquiry, requires people by law to be candid to the authorities on these issues. And we've now had the Casey review, which has outlined very clearly what the national inquiry will look at. And I think the danger is if we'd gone straight into a national inquiry, there would have been a danger that actually what would have happened is we wouldn't have been clear on its mandate. And now we're clearer. But it would have been better to have said, there's a process here, we're getting to a national inquiry, but before we do that, we need the Casey review to work out what the national inquiry looks at.
Kelvin, the issue doesn't seem to me to be a Conservative Labour one. I mean, other than this mistake.
No, it's the whole of the... No, come on, let's deal with it. You were an MP yourself.
It's the establishment.
Yes, you were an MP yourself. I hated what that Conservative MP... I rather admire what she said. I hated what she said. She said, oh, I don't know what happened between 2010 and 2024. The truth is they did nothing. The reality of all this, and this is the shocking reality, is the man that was 100% right on all this and was reviled by every single side of the political spectrum was Tommy Robinson. Right? He was a lone voice saying this is going on, this is going on. He says, yeah, there are aspects to him, I quite understand. Not everybody's cup of tea by 1,000 miles, not particularly mine. He was right about this. And the other one that was banished by it was the guy who used to be a presenter here. He made these points. There's lots of people. Lam should learn, and they should be honest on the Conservative side and say, we did nothing as well.
But the fact that Starmer... To be fair to her, she did say that she was a bit of faith.
She should have climbed into it. She should have climbed into it. None of the lot who did nothing, none of them are in power anyway anymore. They've all disappeared to rather large houses in Oxfordshire.
But it's the police, it's the councils, it's the social services.
And they're all Labour. They're all Labour as well.
And it never really got beyond that level. Why weren't the press reporting it?
No, the press, absolutely. A very good point.
The Times and the Mail.
The Times,
write about
Times, a little bit of the Mail, yeah, something of the Mail. But papers like The Sun didn't want to touch it. Why? They didn't want to touch it because they were scared. They've run their stories about sexual abuse. The advertisers won't come. Right? Well, actually, the advertisers didn't come anyway. So, no, The Sun was absolutely hopeless. They could have done a fantastic job. They didn't want to do it. The Guardian was even worse. What they were saying was, we think it's disgusting that people like Robinson and Mark Steen and the rest of them are all saying this kind of stuff. Right? None of it is true.
To some extent, a feeling that it was racist even to raise these issues.
This is absolutely true.
Cultural problem.
I don't think it was just a race issue. I think there was a problem with 10 years prior there being these accusations of these rape gangs against, against establishment Conservative white figures. You remember Tom Watson had stood up in Parliament and had made those accusations that in the end were totally false, and they were almost all fabricated. And I think the danger was that a lot of politicians saw that and they thought, well, we got it wrong on there, and this is doubly more sensitive because of the community that we're talking about, and backed off. I think, to be honest, we have to put it in that context.
Okay,
you're now defending all politicians. The whole of the House of Commons.
I'm not defending, I'm just saying how we got here. I'm just saying how we got here.
But what about Cyril Smith and Clement Freud, who had turned out to... And Cyril Smith, of course, MP for... where was he? One of the...
Liberal for...
one of the towns where this all went on.
Exactly.
So he was part of all this system of abuse.
Well, what about Gordon Brown? What about all the Prime Ministers? Why don't they all come out and say, well, why didn't we act during that time? After we were talking about a 20-year period. I mean, including, by the way, the beloved Tony. Right? He did nothing. Brown did nothing. Cameron, certainly, he didn't do anything,
I suspect that we might find that some of this goes back even more. I think you could be looking at a generation of this happening behind closed doors, and it starts to come out. And it is...
Well, we're going to have the inquiry, so we'll find out. But people can obviously defend themselves in separate forums.